I'm going to lean into you, you're going to lean into my skills, and maybe what we create together is way better, usually it is, than what any of us brought to the table in the first place.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. I've been looking forward to today's episode. I say that often, but particularly around growth and scale, healthy teams that Zach Montroy, CEO, founder of the Intention Collective, does on a daily basis and is here to speak with us about. Zach, thanks for taking the time to do the pod.
Yeah.
How are you doing today? How is August treating you?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on. I love the podcast and excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. And want to familiarize listeners on the Intention Collective, but thought we'd begin with your story and, creation of the organization leading into it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, my wife and I live in the Nashville area. We have three boys, 10, 9, and 6. We moved down here about 6 years ago from Chicago. And my story is probably like a lot of other entrepreneurs and founders. I worked in a number of larger organizations for a lot of years, and it was really given a lot of opportunity to lead, and probably many of those opportunities that came at way too young of an age for me. In my 20s, I was on a senior management team, and frankly, knew nothing about good and healthy leadership, just sort of modeled what I was taught along the way, and had some really hard lessons that I had to learn in that, and really to learn that leadership was in service to others. It wasn't about me, and had some amazing mentors along the way. Before I moved into consulting, I was running operations for a couple of different organizations, and in that really loved not only getting to put the vision in terms of strategy to work, but really loved helping people connect their unique ability to that overall strategy, to that overall vision, and really help people understand how they can use their giftedness not only to lead and to lead healthy teams, but to really put that to work to serve the overall vision and mission of the organization. So 6 years ago, got to step outside of just one organization and start doing that with many organizations. And, through that experience this year, or earlier this year, I should say, founded the Intention Collective. And that was really all about being able to step into the whirlwind with entrepreneurs, not just come in and run a strategy session every 90 days, but really to offer expertise in areas that oftentimes founders, CEOs, entrepreneurs just don't have. They can't afford. Maybe they don't have the dollars to allocate to that. They don't have the team members to allocate to that, where we can really help step in and help them get traction towards that destination that they're seeking for their company. And so we have an amazing team of talented people that have different expertise in different areas, really ultimately, so that we can serve entrepreneurs and their teams effectively.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's something that entrepreneurs, early stage companies usually table for a later discussion, yet it's so important during these stages, during these chapters, during the growth of an organization. What does it mean to build a healthy company, to build a brave workplace? And how does that impact the foundation, the dynamic that takes place both internally and externally for those organizations?
I think it is the foundation for building a transformational company, right? I mean, you don't see long-term success of any organization that has a shifty foundation. I mean, it's just like building a house, right? You've got to make sure that the bones of the house are, on solid footing. And when I think about, any company, any team, we can have the best product in the world, we can have the best service in the world, but if the way that we're running things from an internal perspective, is not courageous, is not vulnerable, is not based on trust and healthy conflict, and having the right conversations and having deep clarity. And, really all of that boils up to exceptional leaders leading well, serving their teams, serving the people that are entrusted to their care, serving the work. Then ultimately we're going to fail, we're going to falter, we're going to hit ceilings that we can't push beyond, because people aren't going to be invested in companies that are not invested in them. They're not going to give their best work to people who don't care about them, people who use shame as a management tool instead of vulnerability, people who, break trust rather than build and cultivate trust on their teams.
Shame versus teach, and build collaboration. Could we speak a little further about that? Because I think it's such an important point. The communication tools that we use on a daily basis and how they can empower team members or ultimately turn them away. And this is, bigger life discussion, right? How do you
Sure.
interface with others? How do you parent? How do you manage these relationships in your life, but really in the workplace for startups, 9 out of 10 fail the first year. Numbers don't get that much better the second year, all the way up through the first 5. And I think it's often those type of bonds from, initial partners as well as initial employees that fall apart. And like you said, that foundation is just no longer there. So, conflicts, obstacles are inevitable. And how we address those really defines who we are as an organization in many respects. What are healthy ways to address breakdowns versus, like you said, shaming? And I don't think anyone, actively says, hey, I shame my employees, but just, want to put out some good practices for listeners.
Yeah, I agree. Most of the time, we don't walk into organizations and, shame is, being just thrown out there. I think it's sort of like termites in the South, moving from Chicago to the South. We're like, what the heck are termites? And like, how do you look for them? I mean, if you see termites, you've got a problem when you're looking for a house, but it really is the evidence, right, that we're typically looking for. And so when we see things like back channeling, I'm not going to have the conversation with the person. I'm going to have the conversation about the person. When I see lack of clarity, people don't know what success looks like. People don't know what failure looks like. It's not okay to fail. It's not okay to risk, or we get stuck in nostalgia, like the way that we've always done things. Or my favorite, the invisible army, right? I'm going to come into your office and tell you, Jason, there's a lot of people who have a big problem with you. And, for most leaders, you're sitting there like, who are all the people? Like, where's this army of people that you're talking about? And that boils down to, we don't trust one another. We're certainly not courageous. And ultimately, you can't give your best self, your wholehearted self in that sort of an environment. So when we see behaviors like that, typically we see underneath that, there's shame, there's protectionism. I'm afraid to actually put myself out there. I'm afraid to have the conversation with Jason. So I'm going to have the conversation about Jason for whatever reason. But as leaders, that is what we are called to do. We have to create environments where people don't come to work needing to protect themselves, needing to use shame, but rather can show up and say, like, I'm here, I'm enough, you're enough. We're here to do this work, and we're here to do this work in a healthy way together.
I'm here, I'm enough, you're enough. We have the same goals. Let's figure out the best paths on how to do this together, breaking down the curtain. Let's collaborate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think healthy collaboration is one of the most vulnerable things that we can do in the workplace, right? Because collaboration doesn't mean I'm right or you're right. Collaboration really is a commitment to saying, we're going to do this together. And we fundamentally believe that, the sum of the parts of who we are and what we bring is greater than any of us can do individually. And so that means I'm going to lean into you, you're going to lean into my skills, and maybe what we create together is way better, usually it is, than what any of us brought to the table in the first place.
mean, that is the whole idea behind a team, right? The end
Right,
product is that much more impactful than what any one team member could put together on their own.
right, right.
What about accountability? The intersection of work and accountability, because it's great to get along with team members, and when everything's happening, hey, this is easy, no problem. But if team members aren't being accountable, what is that intersect?
Yeah, I mean, accountability is always a really tough topic, right? I mean, it's even tougher to carry out. I, the longer I have been leading, the more that I think that the number one reason that leaders don't drive accountability is really because deep down, we know that we haven't provided clarity. Deep
Mm.
down, if I lean into this hard conversation to hold you accountable, I know that you could come back and say, come on, man, like you did not tell me, you were not clear with me on what you expected. You were not clear with me on what my contribution was supposed to be, or what was important, or where we're going as the organization. I mean, like, fill in the blank. I have never heard once in my life an organization or employees who said, my organization just is way too clear. They communicate way too much. Like, we know with abundant clarity what we're supposed to do. Like, never heard that said. And I think that that's the problem with accountability, right? Like, we are, number one, we don't do it because we know we could be held accountable for lack of clarity. Number two, hard conversations are hard. They're difficult. They're
Yes.
not fun. They're not fast. They're not easy. But as Patrick Lencioni would say, and they found in their research at the Table Group, the more a leader is willing to have the hard conversation and hold people accountable, the less they have to do it. Because I know as a team member, if Jason, my boss, is willing to have those hard conversations, lean in and hold me accountable, then I'm going to hold my team, I'm going to hold my colleagues accountable, right? But if you're not willing to do it, I'm not going to do your dirty work for you. And culture always defaults to the worst behavior we allow. So if I'm not willing to hold people accountable, then, as a colleague, I'm saying, well, they can get away with that kind of work. I can. So I'm not going to contribute at a high level. I'm going to sort of do the bare minimum here because I know I'm not going to be held accountable.
And it really does start from the top, like you're mentioning, the way the leader speaks to other upper management team members, and the way that goes down to mid management and so on and so forth to the bottom.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it really is continued skilling up, right?
Yeah.
Continued skilling up to have those conversations. And I think the willingness as leaders for our team to hold us accountable to doing what we said we would do too.
Mm-hmm. And when you get that dysfunctional dynamic, when you get that toxic culture of negativity, and I've seen it happen at startups. I remember back in 2010, being at a social gaming company, and you'd hear team members kind of complain about management. You'd see discussions, mirror what was happening above, and this all unraveled. None of these are secrets to a story, but I watched it firsthand,
Mm-hmm.
and I've tried to be productive in conversations ever since, and not partake in gossip that you think is fun. It's like you said, oh, I can't have this conversation with management. I'm going to have it about management, and really how that can spread. And you could have one individual have this much larger toxic effect. What are your thoughts towards, a toxic culture, that dynamic of dysfunction?
I have a lot of them. But what you just said there, I want to reiterate it.
Please.
It does not take many people for toxic culture to spread like wildfire. I mean, it's sort of like the barrel of apples analogy, right? Like, it's one bad apple that then spoils the apples around it, that spoil the apples around that. So if it's left unchecked, and it goes back to what I said earlier, right? Like, the worst behavior we allow on our team is what our culture tends to default to. So if, as a leader, I am finding toxic behavior, it's my job to root that out, to have those hard conversations, and maybe lead some people out of the organization that aren't willing to change or hold themselves accountable to behaviors that are not toxic, but rather that cultivate collaboration and trust. I think the more difficult piece is when we find ourselves working in organizations that pervasively have a toxic culture. For the employee who's serving on a team that, leaders are leading with toxicity or leading with dysfunction or leading with shame. I do think we, as human beings are called to have those hard conversations and hold people accountable. But ultimately, sometimes we can't change that, right? If I work for a founder who's unwilling to change, and I've had those conversations with that person, then ultimately that choice is mine to have to leave that organization. But if as a founder, as an owner, and we talk about scaling and optimizing teams, if I have a team member who has the courage to come to me and say, I think the way that you're leading might be dysfunctional, or what you're doing is causing toxicity in our team, I need to listen. I need to take that seriously, and I need to work on some behavioral change and reward that person for the courage that they had to be vulnerable with me and put that out there.
That's a high level communication right there. Having a team member saying it's causing, a toxicity among the organization, and really here are some things we can do to improve this, especially if it's managing up. I try to put on the problem solving hat as much as possible. As marketers, it feels natural. That's how I measure good marketing talent among my
Right.
team, among other teams, is not, how to set up a campaign, how to come up with creative, but what do you do when the campaign is underperforming? What do you do when it is, but you need to do it at much larger scale? That problem solving mindset really shines in those moments, but actually being able to address it, create more of that dynamic, that's more standout leadership. And you've mentioned a few times here exceptional leadership. I think we all strive towards it. What is the path to exceptional leadership in your experience?
Yeah, that is a great question. And there is a book that I would highly recommend for anyone in leadership. It's called The Only Leaders Worth Following. And the authors of the book did just this amazing set of research around leaders, and basically went into the field asking this question, like, name the attributes of the best leader you've ever worked for. And, there really is sort of this list of 10 that tend to be most common. You can sort of like put all of the attributes of leadership under these 10 different attributes. But what they found was there were 2 attributes of the 10 that accounted for 75% of a leader's effectiveness. And the 2 attributes were being inwardly sound and being others focused. So, on the list was, like they pursued vision and they were strategic and they marshaled resources and executed well and paid attention to culture and, motivated, communicated effectively. But the work of exceptional leaders, 3/4 of the effectiveness of an effective leader or exceptional leader is being inwardly sound. So doing the work of self-leadership, of understanding who I am, being self-aware, being emotionally intelligent, and being others focused on leading other people, focused on cultivating ideas and having the courage to lean into developing people and processes. It was about others. And it was interesting, like when you look at the list, who exceptional leaders are, is inwardly sound and others focused. What they did then was think strategically, like all those other attributes fell into what they did, not who they were. So it's really interesting when we think of the work of leadership. It's being self-aware, it's leading with emotional intelligence, and it ultimately is about service to others, not about myself. And I think, when we look at that, I think all of us in leadership probably struggle on the spectrum of, ego, narcissism. How do we make sure that we are focused primarily on service to other people, not service to ourselves?
Not easy to do. Yeah, I
Not
must
at all.
say. I think it's a muscle, right? Ongoing work towards that, both to be inwardly sound, and I'm certainly not an expert or guru of any type on that, but I do know it requires regular practice, and then to be others focused. And I've read so many great quotes, books around being of service to others, and that's where real success comes from. If
Mm-hmm.
those that you're servicing are successful, you're naturally going to be lifted up. So if you're leading the ship and focused on those that are actually driving it, the results can be that much greater and more long term. I mean, we're
Right.
living in an age where turnover is rampant, especially a couple years back. There was a lot of articles around the Great Resignation. Loyalty had
Right.
changed. Many teams are remote and have some type of digital component. It's tougher to bond with somebody just over Zoom than someone you're seeing every day and going to lunch with, and talking about things outside of work versus just what's appropriate for a digital meeting. So
Mm-hmm.
being able to take that extra time as a leader and learn what's going on in team members' lives and what they want to share, learn the successes, the failures in their day-to-day around their assignments and what they're physically accountable for, being able to make very visible changes for them around it and to better it,
Mm-hmm.
and really for the end customer, the end client, the end partner that they're working on behalf of your organization with, I've found can make all the difference. But like I said, I know it's a difficult thing to be consistent about.
And like you said, it's a muscle. And I think many of us were taught leadership is just something that you're born with. And we know through a lot of research that is not true whatsoever. In fact, just making that very personal, my wife and I have 3 adopted boys, and all 3 of our boys are Black. And I remember being at a school event, and I think my oldest son was in kindergarten, and the teacher kept saying, "Oh, this person is a naturally born leader. This is a naturally born leader." And all the kids were extroverted white boys. There were no kids of color. There were no females. There were no introverted. And I mean, of course, my wife's a clinical therapist. I do this work. We had, a tough conversation with that person afterwards, because it has nothing to do with how extroverted or how in line you are with dominant culture. Leadership is a skill. It's a muscle that is developed over time when we put in the work. You can't be others focused if you're not attentive and curious and empathetic and humble. And all of those are skills that you have to work on continually developing. I think the minute that we think we have arrived as a leader is probably the minute everyone should quit working for us, because those are the scary people to work for.
Sure. The ones that feel like they have all of the answers can be the most confused, they say, and that can definitely be felt by the team members underneath them.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, 65% of small businesses fail within the first 10 years. You cannot lead a healthy company if you are not doing the work of being an exceptional leader. And I think empowering a culture of leadership has nothing to do with title or position or pay. I mean, I've been in C-suites with, C-level people, surrounded by them, and not seen a leader anywhere. And, specifically remember working with a defense contractor in their manufacturing warehouses and was surrounded by leaders. It has nothing to do with title or position. But when we are cultivating a culture of leadership where leadership is about seeing potential in people, processes, ideas, and having the courage to develop that, and we are working to create a culture that, is filled with self-aware people who are emotionally mature and principled and purposeful in their work, and are others focused, they're curious and empathetic. We create this environment of trust and healthy conflict and deep commitment and accountability to the work. Those are the companies that scale and grow the fastest, because everyone understands their unique contribution to the destination of where we're trying to go, where we're trying to grow. You don't get to scale, you don't get to growth and healthy growth as a company if every person on the ship is not engaged at the highest levels. You can't do it. The math isn't there.
Definitely want 100% from everyone. And I'll add that I see the most successful companies in many situations described with the name of their founder, the name of their management team, meaning a good leader resonates with the team. It says something about the entity, about their potential growth. We work on investor marketing campaigns and equity crowdfunding with micro cap, small cap public companies, and CEO branding, who is really driving the ship, as you're mentioning, Zach, makes all of the difference from outsiders trying to project where the organization is going to go, where it could run into issues. And I think it has a direct reflection on revenue, stock price, any of the financial metrics that you want to take into account at later stages.
Yeah, I mean, that saying everything rises and falls with leadership, I mean, I would say, just like you are saying, your market value, your credibility, your reputation, the ability to grow and scale as a company all rises and falls, I think, with the ability of leadership of that company.
And Zach, you've given so many great recommendations here. I'd like to ask some questions to potentially package some of those into some smaller, actionable insights. Could be more in depth as well too, but in terms of how to test, when things aren't working out of the gate, steps towards optimization, and any additional tips towards scale. Starting with the test question, if a founder is listening in right now, even if it's someone on the marketing team but has those underneath them, what could they look to try out towards their own model to have this type of impact that we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you can start by just testing. Do people on your team understand with deep clarity what their contribution is? Do they understand not only their unique genius, their unique ability, but can they articulate with deep clarity what it is that they're supposed to do? What does a win look like for them? What is the number, the performance indicator that they have accountability, they have autonomy, they actually can affect? And so, like, put into a sentence, what is it that you're here to do? And what does a win look like for you in a role? And that sounds like a super simple question. And 9 times out of 10, people are like, well, I mean, I do these things. So if you don't have team members who understand that and understand, I think, testing that destination, right? Where are we headed to long term? There is no way that you can break through growth ceilings if that clarity is not there.
Likely going to be astounding. And it shows you where you can close the gaps, even if they are where they need to be. Great. Where are things going from here? How can we make success? How can we make wins, look that much greater? What about when that's not working? What about optimizing? You're identifying toxicity, dysfunction. You've maybe already made some attempts towards it and really don't know where to take things in terms of holding team members to accountability without coming out as a poor leader.
Yeah, I mean, I think you then really start to peel back the onion, or you start to really dig in there. And I think we always kind of go back to 6 key fundamentals of any organization. I think health rests in, our design. So the structure of our organization, we're perfectly designed to get the results that we're getting. The cadence of how we keep one another in sync. Are we working on the most important metrics? So with SCORE, are we really tracking and measuring the leading indicators that we know affect how we grow and scale the company, that everyone understands, the destination where we're going long term, our ethos, our identity, our values are operationalized into habits that we, take time, money, energy, we invest in. They're a part of who we are. And we have the right people. We have the right people in the right seats doing the right things. I mean, kind of going back to Jim Collins and Good to Great there. If we don't have clarity, though, if we don't really understand what, the design and structure of the organization should be, there's no way that we really can tell both qualitatively and quantitatively if we have the right people in the right seat. So I think with those 6 key areas, when we start working on those areas and we start driving clarity and accountability around those elements of growth, we have a strong foundation where we actually can start making progress towards, the destination that we're setting out to achieve.
And what about the progress? What about the destination? If you got the 6 pillars in place, we can even have those published with the video here, and we'll figure out for listeners where they could go to get access to more materials from me, more recommendations. But everything's put in place. It's happening. You're bringing on more team members. You're bringing on more revenue users, depending on the type of organization. What are some tips towards scale, whether it's scaling these processes into larger volumes of team members, using these processes to scale into a higher percentage market share? What are some more examples you could share towards scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, there it sounds super simple, like those areas, and with destination, especially, like, okay, here's where we're going. Well, when we start to work and we really recommend working in 90-day sprints and measuring with great clarity, how are we tracking towards that progress? Are we iterating and changing as markets change and the economic climate of our countries change as well? I think that's where scalability, like sort of the secret sauce of scalability, it lies, because we create these systems, we create these structures. Well, then we sort of add into the mix healthy leadership, and we add into the mix courageous cultures and vulnerability. And like you said, we are investing in growing in those areas. If I'm committed to talking about what's not working and what's working and what are we learning from failure, that's where we really start to iterate quickly. We start to, find things that aren't working that we need to maybe stop doing. But there really is this just overwhelming commitment to continuous growth, not having sort of a fixed, one and done it, or, fix it and forget it sort of mentality. And we have this culture of we are here to do X. We are here to contribute towards Y. Your contribution is this. And we're going to all be in this together. And it is really about the progress that we're making and doing it in a healthy way together that, we sort of see, that's where we start to see jet fuel being poured on the systems and processes, when we really have the right systems in place and the soul and heart of our organization is in a healthy place. There's the right people, right humans doing the right things in healthy ways. Like, that's the recipe, I think, for accelerating growth in a rapid but healthy way at the same time, and purposeful way.
Rapid but healthy, purposeful. You picture that image of the startup where it's photos of their team doing that. It's practices. It's the leadership putting out their thoughts towards what the organization is all about. And many times
Mm.
it seems like there's not a disconnect, but they're talking about something separate than their core product, but it's just all ingrained together as this positive force that continues. And you really bring it to life here. And I think, listeners are taking notes. I know I have notes to share with my department managers, department heads after today's discussion. I could talk about this for hours with you, Zach. As we begin to wrap up our discussion, what are some final thoughts you want to leave listeners with? And what are the best ways to get in contact with you, get in contact with the Intention Collective, to have listeners continue that chat?
I think my encouragement would be a couple of things. I don't think any of us signed up for leadership or founding a company or growing a company because we thought it was going to be easy, right? I think most of us go into that believing in the idea, believing in whatever it is that we're doing. And I think to keep that passion alive, like to rethink that, but also to keep that passion alive in what we're doing. It's not easy, right? It's sometimes not fun. It certainly is not fast. The work of leadership is hard. Like, we signed up to do something hard, and we signed up to do something that I think could have deep purpose. And so I mean, one thing that a mentor told me a long time ago was, imagine, what do you want to be said about you when you retire? What do you want to be said about the impact that you left with the people that were entrusted to your care? I look at that frequently because it reminds me of how I should and want to behave, and how I should and want to grow as a leader. And that requires me, that requires any of us in that position, to put in the hard work, embrace the suck. As I heard one person say one time, like, it's not fun, it's not fast, it's not easy, but you got to put in the hard work if you want to see the results. And I think oftentimes we get so encompassed by the whirlwind that we forget to do that work, to work on our business, to work on our leadership skills and abilities. So that would be my encouragement. If you're in a position of leadership, find a coach, find a mentor, find someone who can hold you accountable, that can sharpen your skills as a leader and develop you, because that investment is going to pay dividends in the future. So that would be my encouragement to any of us in leadership. And thanks for asking about our company. intentioncollective.co is our website, and we've got a couple of free guides that are there to help you diagnose kind of those 6 elements, where you're at with your company, and some tools that you can put into place like tomorrow to start working on these areas as well.
And definitely recommend that listeners get on there today to check it out. I'm not asked to say that, but want to echo everything Zach mentioned in the closing thoughts there. And again, the failure rates with startups, you're mentioning 65% over 10 years. Heard even worse stats than that. Either way, they're bad. And this is the foundation you want to build. And it's just more fulfilling, more empowering for everyone involved.
Yeah.
So Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. We're trying to put out good content, and this is the exact type of messaging we want to get out there. Really appreciate it.
Jason, thanks so much. You're very gracious. Loved being on the podcast with you. I appreciate your time.
Awesome. And want to thank listeners, viewers. We will see you next time.